Deepfake Pastor Mark here. I will turn the show over to Restless in just a second, but I wanted to take a moment and wish all of their listeners a happy Valentine's Day. If you're watching this video, would you click the like button? Or if you're listening on the podcast, write review it for them. They would really appreciate it. And anyways, just to be clear, Charlie Self is a real person, and this is not the human Mark Driscoll who lives in Arizona. This is the deepfake Pastor Mark who lives on the Restless podcast.
Thank you, Deepfake Pastor Mark. And this is Restless. Pastor Michael, that lo-fi mood music can only mean one thing. It's Valentine's Day.
It's Valentine's Day. We're here, and what a special surprise to have Deepfake Pastor Mark jump in. That was something else.
He's here. We're here. Pastor Michael, Valentine's Day is kind of the day for the Restless podcast. It's a special day where we discuss a special topic. I went back and listened to our first Valentine's Day special today. That was also the first time we ever reviewed a Gospel Coalition video. Isn't that wild? That was our first time.
That was our really first one.
Yep. We make a big point of that. And these two fresh-faced guys saying, they are going to say something helpful for sure in this video. And they kept waiting. They kept waiting. And that is where the puerile giggling of Feral Doc's fame came in.
That's where it began.
That's right. That's where it all began. And so we are continuing the Valentine's Day tradition here on the Restless podcast. And this
your audio is a little bit funky.
It is?
It's a little bit weird. Maybe it's just me. It sounds like it's kind of coming in and out almost.
It could be that I'm leaning in and out. So let me try and get this closer. How am I sounding now?
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people should put in the chat if you hear it too. Maybe it's just me, but it just sounds a little bit.
We moved something, and so, all right, we are waiting. We'll wait and see if anybody has anything to say. If they think my audio is weird, yeah. I mean, I don't know. All I can say is I hear me, which is not a lot of help.
It'll probably be fine.
We hope so. I'm gonna with that note though, I am gonna click record on my end in case something very bad happens, and we are just posting audio later in case no one can see. So we're so happy to be here. And Pastor Michael, in our first ever Valentine's Day special, you mentioned you don't really celebrate Valentine's Day, that you are, and I quote, just practical people.
Yeah, this is true. My wife actually isn't even here. I will get to see her because she's on her way home right now, but she's been traveling. It's actually why my background is different, because I decided to work from home today so that I would have an extra couple hours. When I have a meeting tonight, I'd have an extra hour or two probably with my family once they do get home. So that's a nice Valentine's Day thing.
That is.
To be with them. But as far as doing special things, maybe we'd use it as an excuse for something, but up to this point, it's true. We don't really do anything. Well, and I know everybody who listens is going to say, oh, that's like you're failing your wife. Like your wife really wants you to do something and you just don't. It's just you. No, my wife is maybe more practical than I am. She's maybe less into Valentine's Day than I would be. So
we will ask Deepfake Pastor Mark this question sometime. So, but Pastor Michael, we have got to get to work here, because the tradition that the Restless podcast is very committed to, no matter how practical you and your family may be, we here are big Valentine's Day people, because we are big complementarian people. And so our Valentine's Day tradition is to watch live clips of preferably young Restless and Reform folks discussing complementarianism, and specifically the commands in 1 Timothy 2. Pastor Michael, what is the apparent command that we get so much joy out of discussing?
So for some reason, we've decided to make this our Valentine's Day tradition, where Paul says in 1 Timothy 2 that he does not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but rather she is to remain quiet. And so we have watched for the last 2 years. This is our third annual Valentine's Day show, where we get to listen to somebody try to explain that in some way that we find enjoyable.
That's right. And I still look homeless, as I was told by after our last live stream, and we are ready to go. So this year, unfortunately, Pastor Michael, as we continue to have to find these clips, I found a wonderful panel discussion from TGC, a conversation about complementarianism with a motley crew of the who's who of the YRR. We have one Timothy Keller, one John Piper, we have Don Carson, we have Kathy Keller, Tim Keller's wife. We have I don't remember her name, but she is the head of the Gospel Coalition for Women. Because of course there's one for women. It's just a funny, kind of a fun. Maybe I put it in a funny way. Maybe that's not how they really say it. And so the only problem with this video, which anyone watching the video of this reaction knows, is that it is a long video. And as much as I'm down for the live stream, we can't keep practical people on the live stream all night long here to do the whole thing. And so I have had to pull clips. I have had to pull some clips, but the clips Pastor Michael will be reacting to live. He knows nothing about what's coming in this video. And so
it's true. It's possible. When was this? It's possible I saw it back in the day, but I don't recognize it. So we'll find out.
If there was ever a TGC YRR kind of clip you would be unlikely to see, it would probably be this one, because this was the pre-conference event for the Gospel Coalition for Women's 2014 conference. And so this is these are our people, and they are discussing it. So they began their pre-conference event for women with 3 pastors, these 3 men, which I know is one of the things that the complementarians often get flack for, that they just end up loading stuff with men. We obviously don't have a problem with that in the same way, but I think we will enjoy it. And so the interview begins, the conversation, the panel begins with everyone telling the story of how they came to hold complementarian convictions. So Pastor Michael, maybe you and I can share those things after we hear a few of these, but they start with Tim Keller.
The conference. So when you open next year's national conference, I want you to tell all the participants that they're beautiful.
You may remember that last year, I can't.
Sorry, we cut into this mid joke. They had a plenary session where one of the women speakers, her first words were, "You are all so beautiful," and Tim Keller really got a kick out of it and was daring Don Carson to start that way. I'm comfortable saying everyone on the live stream is truly beautiful. Y'all shine like beautiful stars.
I don't remember who it was, but somebody posted some kind of list of differences between men's conferences and women's conferences. It was outrageously funny.
Right.
Right. Maybe we've just had another one.
Yeah, that's one. Of course, the women's conferences, people actually read what it says they should do.
That's true. Yeah.
And actually,
dude, good for them having a nice roast. I thought we were starting with Tim Keller's story, but I guess it's nice we kept the roast.
Goes to the places where they're supposed to go. And
that's right. Tim was coming with me out of something we were doing this morning, and he said, "Where are we going next?"
The way to answer the question historically, how did you get here, is that I became a Christian in college, which, by the way, is a long time ago, in the 1960s. When I went off to Gordon Conwell immediately after college to study for the ministry, Gordon Conwell was an evangelical seminary, a good conservative evangelical seminary with different positions on this subject represented in the faculty. So I got a chance to hear the various views. I didn't have in a certain sense, I didn't have anything from my background that would necessarily prejudice me one way or the other. I sat down with the scripture, and I thought it was clear that back then the word complementarian was not there. The understanding that there's male headship in the home and in the church, that our gendered humanity is complementary we're complementary to one another. We have to work those out through different roles. I accept that because it seemed so clear from the scripture. It didn't seem that the argument was close. Then I met Kathy, and Kathy's own background, and she's going to explain in a minute, strengthened my resolve in this area. The only other thing to say is I was really glad that Kathleen read that part of the document. Obviously, the three of us, John, Don, and I, and others worked on that some years ago. And one of the questions came up was, why put that in a gospel coalition?
This is a great question. So, Pastor Michael, I want to say one thing before we listen to Tim Keller's answer. I think Tim Keller's story of why he is a complementarian is pretty close to mine, right? It is the fact that when you read the plain teaching of Scripture, the opposing arguments to male headship in the home and male and female, and their men and women's roles being different, and therefore they're expressed differently in the home and the church, is pretty much inarguable, right? And it's not even close.
Yeah. We talked about this when we did the little preview show talking about Andy Stanley, that in fact, to deny this, you actually just have to start explaining away Scripture, right? You can't just accept it as it's clearly written. And it's on almost every page, right? It's just everywhere from the beginning to the very end. This is central to much of what the Bible talks about, and to not understand this or to try to obfuscate on this point just leads you into all kinds of problems in other areas. I know I can't remember. I think it was Ligon Duncan who I first heard say, you never find second generation biblical inerrantists who are egalitarian, right? Like second generation egalitarians, I should say, are never biblical inerrantists, because you have to just start throwing parts of the Scripture out, and you have to start being able to say, well, some of this is not actually authoritative. So you have to start denying certain aspects of biblical inerrancy. And so I think that's generally true. Maybe not in every single case, but definitely generally true, because you're explaining away, not just explaining the text.
Right. And so, again, I think this next thing he's going to answer is, why did the Gospel Coalition specifically add to its statement of faith a statement about the roles of men and women?
Statement, why is that part of the Gospel Coalition statement? I think the balanced answer is, on the one hand, we do not believe that gender roles is one of the doctrines that makes up the core of the gospel. We do not believe that you have to believe that in order to be saved or believe the gospel. On the other hand, we feel that the implications of moving away from what seems to be clear teaching of Scripture, that when you make that move, it has a ripple effect into how you read the Scripture in other ways. And we didn't think, therefore, it was a matter indifferent. So we put it in there, and we've gotten a certain amount of heat for it. Sometimes we're told, you seem to think that in order to believe the gospel, you have to be a complementarian. We would not say that, but we also don't want to go on to the other extreme and say that this set of beliefs doesn't have pretty strong implications for how you live the Christian life. So that's why I'm here.
Third way, we hold the middle position. Right.
So, yeah, but again, I do think it's an interesting point. What an interesting point that you can put things in a statement of belief, or perhaps even in a book of church order, that the Scripture does cover, but you want to map a clear statement on. That is an interesting idea, but it is great. It is a classic way to express it in the third way. I think that, again, the reason this becomes such a hot issue is because it ends up just being the question of, will you submit to whatever the scripture says? Because the way you have to handle these texts to conclude something else does not allow you to conclude anything from the Bible if you do so.
Yeah.
We are not going to listen to how Kathy Keller became a complementarian, though if you are so interested, this video, she gives a short story. It's very interesting. She was in the PCUS and was on her way to ordination when she began studying the issue and realized how unbiblical it would have been for her to continue. And so props to her, for making that move. But Pastor
It's
Michael,
interesting, by the way, I should say that, like, compared to when you think about the recent article, that kind of manifesto, in a sense, that Tim Keller just put out,
which we will cover,
which eventually we'll probably get to, the tone in that regarding this issue versus what he just said here is very different. It seems to me anyway. It seems to me that in that he seems to take a much softer view on the issue of egalitarianism, and makes it seem much more like, actually, this is not an issue that maybe at this time he would have said, yep, this still should divide us in a certain way. He's maybe softened on that, it seems like.
And this is I think what we've seen on a whole scale, right, is that ground that they were willing to stake out, it's decreased. So Pastor Michael, we are about to listen to John Piper, how he became a complementarian. Are you prepared for the level of earnestness we are about to be?
Whatever it may be, it will be passionate.
Yep.
Gutters and paint, it's going to all come off, otherwise it's going to chip underneath. I learned everything from this woman. She ran a little business on the side. She
Speaking about his mother,
kept all the finances of the family. She was better than my dad at virtually everything except preaching. And when he came home, so when he was gone, she was just everything, absolutely everything. There wasn't anything she couldn't do. And when he came home, to watch the drama shift to my dad, let's go to church, let's go to the restaurant, let's bow for prayer, let's have devotions, let's. He's doing the let'sing, and she's loving it. She's just loving it. Daddy's home, and I'm not burying.
John Piper loves his mom, by the way, just to be clear, that is coming across clearly.
This anymore. Take it, Bill, and make this family work. So he's loving it, and she's loving it, which taught me that the drama of complementarianism is not competency based. It's just not. It has nothing to do with who's better at what. That's the way egalitarians try to figure out marriage. If you're better at this, you do this. If you're better at this, and they try to leave sexuality out of it. Whereas the Bible says, no, something stamped on a man's heart and on a woman's heart, that the way they dance together is defined in a certain way. So that's the most fundamental influence. 1975, Paul Jewett's book.
So my family has come near me to play with Legos. So if you hear wonderful Lego sounds in the background, that's
all right.
You're getting to enjoy. So Pastor Michael, I don't know. It just he still has a little more to say. It just struck me as kind of a stray. I mean, again, it's very earnest. It's very all over the place. But it did strike me as a bit of a strange story.
In what way? Just because of, like, you're giving your reasons for this, or
would you agree the complementarianism has nothing to do with competency?
Yeah, that is weird, right? Well, so this is actually where I'm sure that we'll see some of this here, and we see it every time we have, discussed different, different aspects of complementarianism, and why we've criticized complementarianism as a structure, as a system, because it is a novel understanding of the roles of men and women that was built around feminism, right? Like feminism was kind of like the heart of everything, and this was a response to that, so it was still built around it. And in part, what you see is that it doesn't actually take into account nature.
Right.
It doesn't take into account that actually men and women are not just different in what they're called to by God, but they're different in what they are.
Right.
You know, like there's actually a difference in nature between them. Now, like he mentioned some of the things, right? Like just these different aspects of literally, I mean, the things he mentioned were basically home-centered things, right? So yeah, look, my mom was good at all these home-centered things. That's good. That's a fine thing. That's, you know, no one is arguing that. But to say that it has nothing to do with competency, I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about, you know, it just depends, right? I mean, are men and women actually fit in the exact same way for the exact same things, even just on a biological, physical account? You would have to say no.
Right. So, yeah, Pastor Michael is getting at what I think is the big critique, and also the weakness, one of the weaknesses of the way complementarianism was defended. It was that it basically took their ground at defending two verses, Ephesians 5 and 1 Timothy 2. And so then all you have are men are the head of their home in marriage, and women are not to teach in the church as elders. And they stuck their ground there. And we are thankful they stuck their ground there, because as Tim Keller said, the biblical evidence is so overwhelming that that is the only way to read those chapters. It's correct. However, then what you've degraded gender to it to like two things. So apparently what it means to be the woman is not be an elder, right? That tells her nothing. And in fact, many men who aren't called to be elders, what does that tell them about masculinity, right? What does it tell single people about being a man or a woman? Because certainly there is something to it for them. I think what John Piper is getting at with this idea of competency, right, is he's not saying women are too dumb to be pastors, right? There are plenty of educated,
right, perfectly capable,
who would have the mental, educational, right, all of those kinds of faculties that a man would have.
Right. Like, are there women that are smarter than men who are currently pastors?
Of course.
Yep. Yeah.
Sorry, I was about to name names of men that I guarantee we had women listeners who were smarter than, but that would be really yeah. Anyways,
of course, but of course, right? Like that is obvious. And so he's right in pointing that out, that we're not going to make the line purely based on like a utilitarian basis.
Right. But there aren't women who would be competent pastors if God has not called them to do so.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying, right? And that's not very controversial, right? Because it's just like saying a woman would not make a better father. Yeah. Nor would a father make a better mother, right?
I mean, it's not controversial to you and me.
I guess it's not.
We live in a wild world, Matt.
We do live in a wild world. So we'll let Mr. Piper finish his answer.
Man, male, and female. One of my teachers at Fuller came out. He said Paul made a mistake in 1 Timothy 2:13, and my heart just was crushed. I had no idea he stood there. I was in Germany when I read this book. I had gone 3 years and didn't know what they thought. And I thought, you're saying Paul made a mistake? Yes, that's what he said. I thought, well, he's gone, and he wasn't gone, which means my seminary was gone. And so I was thrown into a set of controversies in the mid-'70s, and Elvira and Berkeley Michelson and Gilbert Bilezikian and Catherine Krager and others, and the booing and the hissing of those days was really ugly. And you were obscene. Virginia Mollenkott called me to my face obscene for what I believed. And so I thought, okay, this is really heavy and hot. And so I got to find some friends. and we're going to wave a flag. And so Wayne Grudem and I began to wave our little flag. We edited a book called Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, and we formed the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, which, praise God, is still in existence today. And so that's my pilgrimage into the
Restless sells flags. I'd like to wave some so we can make some friends, right? We'd like to wave our little flag. So just very interesting. John Piper feeling the heat. It's just interesting to hear the context of where they came, where the complementarians came from. And the next clip, as I have lost my voice suddenly, is D.A. Carson giving his answer.
In my own case, I was brought up in French Canada, which at the time, not today, but at the time was an extremely patriarchal society. I don't say complementarian, I say patriarchal.
Pastor Michael, we found our villain.
Okay, right. You see how he set that up.
Oh,
was really under a form of a medieval brand of Catholicism. So that even...
Pastor Michael, yay, nay, or nuance. In Canada in the 60s, in French Canada, it was ruled by medieval Roman Catholicism.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have no idea, but I have a feeling that is not true.
I do have a feeling there were no inquisitors.
Evangelical Christians were made to look startlingly fresh and open if they lived lives that were closer to what we would today call complementarian, that looked freeing in comparison with what we saw in the broader culture. My own parents both had been to seminary, both had studied Greek and Hebrew. My mother was a better student. When my mother led Bible studies for women, which I didn't normally go to, but to young people's groups and that sort of thing, which I did, I always thought that she was better at actually handling the scripture in some ways than my dad was. So I had some of the same reflections that you had. That is to say, competence is not the fundamental criterion. But
so there's D.A. Carson's story. Pastor Michael, any thoughts about, again, we're getting a very similar a similar story here. What do you think about this?
It's interesting how two of the stories, right? Tim Keller's was actually pretty great. I mean, it was pretty just straightforward. Look, I saw both the arguments. I read the Bible, and the Bible's clear. So, I guess good on Keller for that. Both the other two seems like there's this sense that, well, in order to defend complementarianism, I first have to disparage my father and talk about how much better my mom was than my dad in front of these women, because maybe that'll make it more palatable. And that's pretty sad.
Ouch.
I mean, that's how it sounds. Am I wrong? And maybe I'm just hearing that in, but this wasn't that long ago. I was going to say, just because in the modern time, I mean, everybody
This is
just
2014.
disparages dad, but no, that was common then too, right? 2014, 2015. Like, it sounds like you are, disparaging your father to make this more palatable to the women in this audience. Now, it's not, maybe they wouldn't see it that way, but I do think it's weird to just talk about how much better your mom was than your dad at all of these things as the way that you learned complementarianism.
I don't know how it helps.
Hey, my dad was super incompetent, which is why we should all be complementarians and believe in men as the head of the household.
And in the church. Yep. So I will say, we may hear about the villains of patriarchy again on this panel.
Yeah, that too, right? You have that clear setup of, the bad guys, patriarchy, right? So, hey, feminists, we have the same enemy, right? Like, we're against the same bad guy. Yeah.
I do want to say now, obviously, I don't know anything about D.A. Carson's growing up in medieval Roman Catholicism. I'm sure it was pretty difficult with all the indulgences and the great crackdown on Protestantism he had to suffer through. But I do know that the thing he was pointing out is actually very helpful, that it's actually just very much in our postmodern 21st century. I think that's the century we're in. The world we live in makes the biblical commands on these issues sound restrictive. In plenty of the world and most of human history, they were normal. There was more freedom. And so it's this one of the things with it. And this is why, when Pastor Michael, you described it right at the beginning, this is a reaction to feminism, but it's still kind of trying to exist in the same world, right? Because yeah, it really does. In plenty of countries still today, the positions held by the Bible are remarkably better for women, families, right? They're, in many ways, right? So I do think that is an important thing, that even the like, you just need to travel, you just need to go to other places in the world, to be frank. Like you will learn that these commands are not, they're not out, people aren't outraged by them, right? They don't have the same secular sensibilities. So we've come to the three most important clips. The last clip, the last thing they do, it feels like they somehow time traveled and stole an idea from us. They make them give 10-second hot takes right at the end, which I really hope we have time to jump in on, which means we will probably have to play our song for those 10-second hot takes if we're able to put it on in the background. But this is where we start getting to them answering, what is complementarianism? And I believe this is Keller answering that question.
I almost interrupted you while you were talking. Complementarianism is not a women's issue. The whole name should tell you that. It is interlocking gender roles of men and women. And men need to understand complementarianism probably more than women. We are the ones that are always dealing, well, what does submission mean? And what does that look like? And how do I live that out? And the men don't talk about it. And they're the ones, I think, I would be delighted if at the next Gospel Coalition conference, there was a panel like this or a discussion like this for the men, because
fortunately, the people on this stage have literally 100% say over if that occurred at their next conference.
The men have to understand that their headship is derived from the way Jesus treats the church, that it's a servant headship. It's not about getting the perks and the privileges and the remote and, having everything your way. As much as women have to understand that their submission looks like Jesus in Philippians 2, that it's not about being a doormat. It's about bringing your gifts to the full thing. So the main thing complementarian is not just a women's issue. It's a church issue.
Anybody want to add?
Well, I would add.
Pastor Michael, do you want to add anything to Kathy Keller before her husband jumps in?
It's interesting, even in just the examples, right? Like, where does this go wrong? Clearly, where it goes wrong for men is this like arbitrary power. They get the remote. And clearly where it goes wrong for women is that they think, oh, I'm just a doormat. I shouldn't say or do anything. Now, do these two things happen? Sure they happen. Is that the norm, Matt?
Nobody
like for us,
the remote in my house but me. That is
right. Just what a sad world that everybody laughs at this. Like, yeah, isn't that funny? Like it has what a horrible life. Like you have nothing. If you're debating, if it even comes into the debate, who is in control of the remote? You have a horrible life and you need to do something with it. You need to do something with your life.
Somebody clip that for me. I need my Pastor Michael yelling about that. I do think actually in my home, my wife begs me if we're going to watch something to just choose. I'm like the least committal on those kinds of things, which is why.
Even that. So even what you say there, so when you hear those two things though, again, what are the actual temptations of men and women, generally speaking, right? They're speaking to a general audience about complementarianism. I don't think those are the two extremes, right? I think that abdication and being passive for
Absolutely.
Men is a
Laziness.
much more
100%.
Laziness. That's a much more common sin, and should be probably more the primary example, right? Rather than asserting authority, most of us have no idea, even in a healthy way, how to assert ourselves at all, right? Like we are, like we didn't have fathers, and like men generally are just in this like wayward place. Which out of that wayward place, you have these, false fathers like Andrew Tate or others that come and show this kind of like, wicked kind of asserting yourself. And men are going to be like, wow, look, somebody's actually teaching me how to assert myself. So like I'm in charge of the remote. Like, that maybe that was a thing for the boomers, right? Maybe it was, but it just doesn't seem common. And on the other hand, like one of the primary issues for women is not that they are passive, right? It's actually that, generally speaking, women, maybe not, I don't know if assertive is necessarily the right word on this end, but do like, try to assert themselves into places of authority that really is not their place. Like that's within a feminist culture. Of course, that's more common. Of course, that's the more common sins on either end. But it just doesn't seem like those are brought up a lot.
Can you quick share your Twitter handle for all complaints?
Yes. All questions can go to @Mr. Klein.
That's great. So I do think you're right. I do think probably that example wasn't very relatable to John Piper, who, of course, famously has basically never owned a TV. But I do think let's let Tim Keller add into this conversation.
Actually, that complementarianism is not.
Oh, by the way, for some reason they decided to frame the how to explain complementarianism is by saying what it wasn't, which just gives me vibes from the first time we did this. Hey, what is this?
And that is what that. But let's just say this though: that is, as a system, that is what complementarianism was developed as. We're not feminism, and we're not patriarchy.
That's true.
That's how, like, that is what complementarianism is. It's saying I'm not that and I'm not that. There is no constructive vision for what men are supposed to be and women are supposed to be and what they are to be together and in the home and in the church and in society as a whole.
Well, this isn't quite working. I'm trying to say that complementarianism can be lived out in somewhat different ways. And so I almost want to say complementarianism is not necessarily exactly like the church you came from that said we're a complementarian church. That a complementarian church in another part of the world, a complementarian church in another city versus the country.
So start of the answer is these things are going to vary from place to place. I have seen this.
Hey, if you come to my church in the city, it might look like men in ballet costumes dancing around for the offering. So just be careful what you think complementarianism is, he says.
Michael, do you think we're gonna get an answer of what it is? Like we asked about what does this verse mean? Do you think we are gonna get a direct statement of what is this?
I guess we probably will not. We probably will not get it direct.
Everybody's going to have to draw a certain line somewhere. As soon as you say,
there it is. We have to draw a line somewhere.
All right, just tell us where.
Just give us. This is our second try, Tim Keller. This is our second try.
Here are the gender roles. The Bible actually leaves a lot unsaid about what that means. So the way you live it out usually means making choices. In our church, men and women do this and that. Everybody,
can you tell us what this and
this or that? Tell us where the lines are. Tell us what this or that is. Tell us what the Bible doesn't leave free.
On somewhere, we need to be a little flexible with each other. I do think that complementarians tend not to. They tend to say the way we do it in our church, exactly the way our elders say. This is how the gender roles work out. Is the only way you can.
Is that true of complementarians? They're just too harsh and too hard on this,
the Gospel Coalition, one of the most currently most well-funded, most viewed, most powerful complementarian organizations, I don't think could be accused of dogmatically announcing what gender roles are. They're willing to dogmatically announce there is a line, and it's sitting there somewhere.
Just to be clear, so we can push really hard into what you should do on an unsafe work site as a construction worker, but we cannot tell you the basic do's, don'ts, this or that of complementarianism.
Just one line.
Can be a truly complementarian. If you're slightly looser than that, then you're really kind of a closet egalitarian. See that?
You should never, ever accuse someone that.
He used the word. He used it.
There is no room to ever accuse someone of being a closet egalitarian.
That's one of the themes of our movement, as it were, because I want you to
Bane. The Bane. I almost tried to do a Bane impression, but everyone will be thankful I didn't.
So I want to say complementarianism is not necessarily exactly like the last church you were in. There are more than you can believe the basic principle. It makes us complementarian, and yet different temperaments, different cultures, even different ways of working can be utilized. So there's a variety.
But let me push you on that, though. Let me push you just the same. Be as flexible as you like, but at some point, if it's all spectrum, where do you cross the line?
So DA Carson, unlike last time, he's decided on this panel, Tim Keller, you are going to answer this question for these wonderful women in the audience who've paid their money, they've come this way.
Line so that you're not complementarian anymore.
Oh, well, okay. Certainly when we say,
dude, I love the regret that Tim Keller feels.
To even say there are some things in the church that a woman who embraces her role cannot do.
We're going to get it.
Frankly, even if you say that, I think you're complementarian, even if you haven't defined what that is. Now, I would rather say women shouldn't be.
I didn't realize it was there. So if you say there is anything a woman who's a member of your church cannot do, you are a complementarian. And
interesting. Well, even that, again, negative vision, right? Like it's
correct.
All negative. It's all just don't, right? Don't do this. And this is one of the things we pointed out about complementarianism is that because it just draws this arbitrary line, hey, men and women, they're basically the same. They can have the same giftings. It all kind of works out the same. But here's this line at the pulpit. Here's this line at the home. And that's like, you can't cross those. But there's no like intrinsic reason outside of the pure biblicist. It says not to do that. And that's a good reason, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to have the text, again, God bless them for that, for keeping, that much of it. But to say that there's not more to it, right?
Yeah.
That actually God has designed the world to have both men and women who are different and are made with these different ends in mind. Like that is, without that, what you're saying sounds completely arbitrary.
We haven't gotten the clarity, though, that you just articulated. So my notes say there's 30 more seconds of Tim Keller talking about this before they move on. So let's find out.
Pastors or elders, though I do recognize that there might be parts of the world in which you have churches that don't have elders. And then, talk to me. How do we still maintain the idea that there are some things that Paul's forbidding something?
Yes.
I knew my wife's going to say
yes.
that.
I'm trying to get you to say that.
Paul's forbidding.
It's what he said in the other video.
And apparently, Kathy Keller was tapping his arm to say, Paul forbids something. As like, oh, man. Kathy Keller might be better on this panel. Doing the like, she might be more.
Something to women.
Something has to be obeyed.
Right. As long
as
you say that there's something women can't do in the church as her way of embracing her role, then I think you're a complementarian, even if we can't always agree on exactly how many things that is
In the church and the
By the way, Kathy Keller guffawed at the end of his answer. She laughed. So anyone who wants to say I shouldn't be laughing,
We're just taking our cues from Kathy Keller.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the same answer that we got in the other video.
Right.
That they're like, yeah, well, there's something to be obeyed. Okay. What, and he did say, they should not be pastors or elders. But some churches don't have those. So
that was the weird, he backed off that real hard. And in a weird way, because I think I feel comfortable saying I would like to draw a line and say that churches should have pastors and elders, by the way, let me just keep drawing willy-nilly lines.
We are glad to draw more lines here at Restless, including that one.
Yes.
You should have pastors and elders.
So my next clip here is and so we want to give this the whole panel, we want to review them in fairness. My next clip is called J Pipe batting cleanup on aisle 5. So I think John Piper might return to Tim Keller's comments and seek to provide some more clarity.
The king of the universe.
I want to make sure what he said doesn't get soundbited out there as a
By the way, sorry, John.
It has. We have done well actually off of soundbiting it. Also, for the record, the Gospel Coalition soundbites that in the other video, right?
Yeah.
With when both he and Carson both say that same thing. Yep, there's something to be obeyed here.
This went over so well on this panel. They created a 3-minute video to get that point across.
Defining characteristic of TGC, because you said if someone believes there is something a woman can't do in church, he's a complementarian. That's not good.
Well,
Good for you, John Piper. Also, this is why John Piper did get the most heat out of all of these guys on this issue, because Tim Keller was training up egalitarian pastoresses. I don't know how you want to say it. He was training up women who went out and became like female pastors, and like we're saying, yeah, like he was like my inspiration in this. And John Piper was getting yelled at because he said things like women shouldn't be police officers, women shouldn't be in the draft, women shouldn't be fighting in the military. He was drawing the lines, so I want to give credit where credit is due.
Right. And again, good for John Piper deciding. And that's, again, why I include this clip, because I don't want it to sound like the D.A. Carson clip that we did 2 years ago where nobody says anything. But again, part of the problem, even with John Piper and, John Piper, right, saying things like men should open doors, right? He would make these kinds of statements, and I might agree with a number of them. But again, when you don't have if the concept of complementarianism I have is these 2 verses,
Yes.
and then you're like, they can't be police officers. Why?
Yeah, it felt arbitrary and weird.
It was arbitrary, and obviously, I think it is part of why, the complementarian consensus has certainly been breaking down.
because she might not be allowed to be the janitor,
well, no,
or
the
she
idea
might
was
not
that
be allowed to whatever.
Tim could be Tim could be saying something that could be taken too restrictively, I guess, is the
forbidding something. I see what you're going. Go ahead.
So I think we do need to be more precise, namely to go with in the home, you got this headship and submission piece, and in the church, eldership, and we're all submitting, men and women, to the elders. And so that's the dynamic. There are these 2 structural roles that complementarians say are essential for joy in the home and in the church. And what I would say it's not is to take those 2 and say something about them to prevent caricature. So headship should be spoken of more in terms of the burden of responsibility, not the right of power, because that's the accent of Ephesians 5:25. Love as Christ loved the church. So whenever we're talking to the men, and I think maybe more discussion is happening than you say.
Oh, well, I'm not at the men's conferences, so I don't know.
Men, because
John Piper is right, by the way.
Yes.
He's very, very right about that. It's hard to count how many times as a lowly man I may have heard a description of the need to to bear the burden of responsibility.
totally agree that this is mainly a men's issue. If men did what they ought to do the way they ought to do it, I think women by and large would flourish. So that's totally there. Then the qualification on the submission side is to use language that says, if a woman says, "What do you mean by submit?" which I probably will get to, I would say it means you're really happy when your husband leads well. I say, oh. So,
Pastor Michael, how do you feel about John Piper's answers as to, so again, credit to John Piper. He has decided I'm staking out here's what here is I'm willing to make statements
Yep.
on what these mean.
Right. Bring a little bit of clarity. You notice again, and now, okay, let's say they are speaking to a conference of women, right? Like they're
Correct.
speaking to a room full of women.
Yep.
And that for men is a weird experience. And so
Yep.
the way they're talking is, very likely going to be, filtered through some kind of, okay, I want to be extra, kind. I want to be extra gentle. I'm not going to do quite what I do maybe all the time. But you still notice, even in what he just said, what you have is all of the onus being on men, and women are like, actually the command for them to submit is just they're happy.
Right.
Do you notice that? So in other words, men, you might sin by not doing what you're supposed to do. So you need to do this. Here's what obedience looks like. Women just like enjoy things, like just be happy. But what does that do? All of a sudden that says, hey, if you're not happy in your home, your husband is doing something wrong.
Sure.
But he might not be. Right. And here's the problem with that. It's not that that doesn't happen. Of course that happens. But the part of the problem is that the messaging from the world, by and large, is women, if you are not happy, then something is wrong with everyone else around you. Right. And so you need to change your setting. You need to leave your marriage. You need to, do something. Right. Somebody has to do something for you.
Right.
And then what, like when you have that background, right? You've grown up watching Disney movies. You've grown up with the world saying you were like, your whole role is to be happy. And when you're not, it means that everybody else is some kind of a problem, especially men. Then you hear that from John Piper. That didn't change anything, right? That was not a command from Scripture to submit to your husband as to the Lord. Right? It doesn't just mean be happy. In fact, it's going to mean there are going to be times that you're not happy because you think that your husband is making the wrong decision.
Right.
And as long as that is not a sinful decision, right? As long as it is not a decision that is causing you to sin or bringing harm in some way, right, to you, your kids, then you submit to it. Right? And that, like, that's maybe going to be extremely hard. I don't know any women who are happy, right? Flourishing. I can guarantee you could ask my wife, who would say she is very happy, right? She is happy in the home that we have together. We have a great life. We don't just fight over the remote, let's put it that way. Like, we have a great life. But if I was to ask her, hey, have you been happy with every decision I've ever made?
Right.
She's not going to say yes, like that's just an absurd thing to say, that submission means you have to be happy, right? Just being happy with what your husband does, because you won't always be.
This is actually the new example that I've begun using with this. The same word for wives to submit to their husbands is the same word Paul uses for the general command of Christians to submit to the government. And I will tell you what, as a person who's been called by God to submit to the ruling authorities, I do not always enjoy that. Because men, women, and children do not enjoy submission. I mean, I don't know
always,
how.
Right? And now it can be a joyful, wonderful thing. Especially when things are in harmony, it can be a joyful and wonderful thing. It's just not always going to be that.
That's right. I obviously
that just can't be the standard of whether or not you are actually submitting.
I obviously hope for everyone listening, your home is in a better state than our country, right? Like, because, right. But I do think, right, if this means something, right, it means submission costs something. And obviously, right, the reason we talk about Christ giving up himself is because of the so many times where he corrects the apostles who think about leadership, and he says, you don't lead like the Gentiles do. You don't lord it over them. You serve, right? Like that. Jesus's whole thing is leadership costs something, right? And maybe costs more. But it's just a weird, again, they are speaking to women. I can definitely appreciate John Piper is trying to win them over, right? He's trying to say, I'm laying out the path of happiness for you. The problem is that, man, I just feel like that rhetorical move, we have tried it in America for so long.
Yep.
This is the way, you're going to love it. Come on into the Reformed Church. Come on into conservative Protestantism. Come on in. You're going to love it.
And also, by the way that he frames it is also, it's not just in a limited way, but just totally. He says, I think all of this would be solved if men were doing their job. Right. Which is to say, women don't sin in this way.
Right.
Women, like feminism, it's 100% on men. I will agree that because men are the head, generally speaking, women do follow, right? Generally speaking. But also, women sin. Like men, women also sin, right? To remove that agency from women as if they're just this like nothing thing, right? No, they have a will. They also can choose to sin even when they're in a perfectly fine situation that is not causing them to do something wrong. And so it just removes, it belittles women. It really does. It belittles women, and it puts men in a situation where they're told, hey, you have to do all of this stuff. It's going to be extremely taxing and difficult. And if your wife isn't happy, it means that you're just doing a bad job. And there's nothing in this for you, right? Like there's no glory. Why did Christ submit to the Father and die and take for himself a bride, the church, for the glory that was set before him? Right? Like this too is what we are supposed to be motivated by in marriage, in the home, right? What's the glory? Where is the glory that comes from that? What they're describing is not a situation that will lead to any glory for a man.
Mm-hmm. It is fascinating how, as I think about this, how much the story of the fall goes into pointing out how they are, how the different ways they both are at fault, right? Even though Adam is held as the federal head of humanity, ultimately responsible, the Bible is brutally clear, right? Again, we often even talk about the fall in this way, like Adam was supposed to be there to kill the serpent. And again, I think women do really have agency. Women do, a man or a woman can just as easily destroy their home. And obviously, because we know we live in an actual, not hypothetical world, the real world is typically full of people who are both some at fault, right? Like that's just how it is. Almost, even if one of them, even if we're in a very clear-cut case where someone is very clearly in the wrong, both people probably have some degree of, some culpability. But yeah, I do think it is important. So Pastor Michael, we've got 2 clips I want to play through. And then we've got the exegetical hot takes, which I'm so looking forward to. So this is the panel's opinion of patriarchy.
Patriarchalism. In fact, this group knows something of the history of where the term complementarianism was coined. Do you want to unpack that a bit? Because you were part of that.
Well, I don't remember who coined it, but it did come out of the milieu of those controversial days. And the aim was to find a positive, rich, robust word between the abuses of tradition, the abuses
Robust, TM John Piper, every time he speaks.
Of heavy-handed, patriarchal, male dominance on one side, and the gender leveling, egalitarian emphases on the other side. We looked at those and said, that's not who we are. And what I discovered in those days is that all the writers that were attacking me were attacking that. And I asked myself what they were saying. It was the fallacy of the excluded middle. So the middle, we were saying, don't lose the distinctions and egalitarianism of here, and don't go to the abuses. In fact, I think that's the way Ephesians is crafted, because when Adam and Eve fell, they fell into the abuses of their roles. And women became either manipulative or doormats, and men became either passive or domineering. And in the New Testament, the errors of both of those were corrected with a thing in the middle, which we finally landed on complementarian.
So that is John Piper explaining, I think, again, very helpfully and importantly for people to understand exactly where the term complementarianism came from. So, Pastor Michael, what do you think about the excluded middle, which is the Bible forbids something somewhere?
Yeah. So again, we've covered. I don't know that there's anything more that I can say on that we didn't already say. That clearly, this is a new kind of conception of the way things should be in response to feminism and in a very particular time in history, right? When I like the way that he describes the way everything has been up until now, right? Like the way, so patriarchy, by the way, like what they would describe as patriarchy has been the way things are always until, especially in the industrial era, right? Like the 20th, 21st century, following the leveling effects of technology and the removal of the home as the primary economic and social engine of society. Like that, in doing those things, we are now in a very peculiar time in history that is not like almost any other time before us. Now, there are obviously, people are the same in many ways. Sins are the same in certain ways, but we are in a peculiar time. So you could go to somebody in the, 1800s and they very possibly, especially if they were poor and they were say a poor farmer, they're probably living much the same way that people have lived for 1,000 years. Yeah, like they're just living in a very kind of typical way from what has gone before. And so things have changed drastically. And it's from that vantage point, that peculiar place, that now he just said, we don't want to be like these traditions, right? We don't want to be like the way things have always been, in other words. We want something else, but also we don't want feminism. Mm-hmm. But what you're doing is you're starting with basically the same presuppositions. You don't realize it yet, but you're starting with the same kind of, you're starting from the same vantage point of feminism to judge what has come before. And so you're using the same arguments against something that you're calling patriarchy, right? Well, because of the abuses. Well, I mean, everything has abuses. Okay, so was it all abuse? Was it abuse from always, every time, every family that ever operated where the father was the head? Was that always abusive? Was it always abusive before women could vote in a democracy? Was it always, that was always wrong in every case? Because that's what it sounds like. That's just the vantage point that you're standing in and then condemning what has come before. Right. And so the issue with that is not that there weren't abuses at times. The issue is that you are sharing the presuppositions of what you recognize is wrong, but you're not actually seeing that you have those same presuppositions, those same, presuppositions that ultimately end in a kind of androgyny, right? Mm-hmm. Men and women are the same. This is this is why someone like, maybe an Amy Bird, who's on, Mortification of Spin. It's like, hey, we're a really conservative, reformed podcast. Can say things like, of course, men and women should be police officers, and it just matters if they're good at their job. And everybody there was just like, yeah, right. But she's carried on the same trajectory, right? She hasn't, that's just where you end up, is where she has now gone, preaching on Sundays, things like that. I think that what's going on here is actually, it's still a problem in that you're not recognizing that you have the same presuppositions. You're just not willing to take the next step into that androgyny. But you have the same presuppositions. And that's actually what our problem is in many ways with complementarianism, is that you're sharing those presuppositions.
Right.
We don't have a problem with you calling out abuses where there are abuses.
Right.
But you're calling them out from the same vantage point of what is itself an abuse.
And neither do we have the problem with the term complementarian in as far as it's supposed to point out the harmony of the gender binary working together. So
right.
The other thing I think is interesting when we think about this term patriarchy, by the way, I have no particular like need for that English term. It is interesting. I was just having to read my seminary a book by a very well-known complementarianism, Andreas Kostenberger. His book Marriage and the Family, which by the way is a great book in case anyone's wondering and wants to think about kind of ethics issues and relate in relation to the family. He actually, he suggests that basically because of the baggage that has come with the term for patriarchy, that he says, actually, if we look at the ancient world and their home, he says, and even their society, he said it was like, he describes it. What is the word he uses? I should have looked this up before I sat down. He uses like patricentrism. So it's not that the dad just always got his way and like just had his foot down. It's just that the world, their family revolved around him. So everyone was involved in the things he was doing, and they were doing like, if he was a farmer, then everyone is going to listen and do farming things, right? They're going to all be involved. They're all going to be going in the direction he is. And that similarly, the men who led their communities, religious groups, that he's saying that, again, he's not trying to get rid of the idea of their leadership, their rule, but he's trying to help, again, unload some of the language. And I think that that's helpful. But here's the question I have with the term for patriarchy. So obviously that is like, it is a truly villainized term, and it's much more so now in 2023 than it was in 2014 when this panel occurred. But here's the question. When you go to someone's house, or you drive by their house, or you see their bumper sticker and they have a thing that says fight the patriarchy, does that mean fight abuses in male leadership or fight abusive male leaders? Is that what it means? No, I think everyone knows the answer is no, right? No, it doesn't mean that. I'm maybe you have a good idea. Do they just mean like destroy? I mean, you think of maybe a better answer, but my answer is basically it means destroy Western civilization.
It does, right? Yeah. Western civilization, and like specifically the Christian elements of Western civilization, right? I mean, Christianity as a whole is a part of the patriarchy, right? Western literature, right? That like the foundations of our justice system, all of these sorts of things. These are all the patriarchy that all need to come down. And it's not usually, right, a lot of these people wouldn't be able to outright just define it, right? But they will just call all of these things a part of that patriarchy. Yes. Which, what you're pointing out shows like the problem with, oh, they're talking about something else. No, they are talking about you, John Piper.
And but what you don't understand is they're actually also playing a shell game. When you go, really, you want to destroy everything? They're like, oh, so you support Andrew Tate, huh? Oh, you think Donald Trump is an honorable husband? And it's like, well, no, I was just wondering why we had to like remove so many white men from our seminary education, like why you're trying to replace using Calvin's Institutes with something else. And it's like, well, right, because it's the shell game. So whenever it's opposed, we bring up the abusive examples, or we bring up the abhorrent, immoral parts of Plato, right? That was, canonized in Greek culture, and whatever. And it's a shell game. And I think that's, I don't know. Sorry for anyone listening. I hope that was worth the price of admission here on Valentine's Day, because for me, that was a helpful thing to realize. So Pastor Michael, we, who are no respecter of persons, Pastor Michael, who's practical, we are no respecter of all the Valentine's Day things. And so I wanted to play one more clip before we get to our hot takes here, where they ask, why does complementarianism matter to single people? Now, I think it's an interesting question. I do not remember how they answer this question, because if you basically limit it to marriage and leadership in the church, it actually kind of doesn't. It also tells me that probably a huge amount of their audience are single women, right? Like that. I assume they would know that and why. So I think this is where this answer starts. If not, I apologize.
That question that you gave us earlier, I came at it a little different way. So let me just say a word here that might be relevant. Why would the single women here bother themselves with this if complementarianism is mainly experienced in the marriage? And one, you don't become a complementarian on the day that you're married. And therefore,
Again, this is the weird thing. Okay, maybe complementarianism is experienced mostly in marriage. But again, it's just so impoverished then. Your gender doesn't start to matter once you get married. And obviously what John Piper is trying to get at is women don't in general just submit to the men they know, right? They don't function in a marriage relationship with men. But I don't know. It's just a weird, impoverished understanding again of gender.
Yeah. I want to hear where he goes with this, but I've got thoughts on that.
Marriage might be in the future. It'd be good to know what you are before you get there. Number two, the dance of men and women in the workplace and in the church is not just like a bunch of guys and a bunch of gals. It is unique.
Thank you.
And how that rhythm is played out matters what you think about roles. And third, the wider culture is this is just a huge issue, and you're in that culture and you need to know what you think. Should women be on the front lines in combat? That's going to flow out of your convictions about this kind of issue. And lastly, you all should be church members, and you should care about who leads your church. So this is an issue that everybody in this culture who is a Christian must come to terms with, single or married.
All right, let me change gears. We're going to take 2 or 3 minutes.
He does. I mean, in the end, he does do what
does.
you said he was going to do. It does really only relate to marriage. And now he said something weird about the workplace, right? Like, okay, what? Why is it? He said it affects the workplace, but it was just kind of weird. In what way? Like, what's he saying? I don't know. The dance.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't.
A workplace that felt like a dance of men and women.
Oh man. Yeah. So, but generally speaking, he did say, and then he drew that other line, right? Okay, no women on the front lines of battle. Why? Is there a direct verse about that? There's a bit of a verse about it, but it's not the typical complementarian verse. And so why? Like, what if this does revolve? Now, here is why I think it's okay to show how these things work out in the home and then in the church, like primarily, is because where you see the distinction, where you see the difference, as well as those ways that these differences are harmonized into something that is glorious, that is most clearly seen in the home, right? In marriage, in having children, right? In roles as father, mother. So that happens in the home. And the church is the household of God, right? It's ruled by fathers, by church fathers. But this is what elders really are supposed to be. We are brothers and sisters. You're supposed to treat older women as mothers, older men as fathers, younger women as sisters, younger men as brothers. And so this also is a family, right? So a kind of family. It's not the same, but it is in a sense a family, the household of God. And so these things are made most clear in a sense in those places, I think.
Yeah.
Or like the fullest, maybe you could say the fullest expression is seen in those places, right? In the fullest expression of masculinity and femininity is shown forth in marriage, in the fruit of the marriage bed, in the roles of mothers and fathers. Now, what you could say, because complementarianism focuses on husband, wife, and pastors, not pastors. It's really, kind of the focus. You lose the role of father, right? Father does not play a significant role in that framework. Not that it doesn't matter, but even when I think back over reading the complementarian books that I've read, being a father versus being a mother does not play a massive role in that. But that's huge, right? If you're thinking about how you as a single person are to relate to this idea of the roles of men and women, well, part of that is how you relate to your mother and your father. And obviously we live in a time when not everybody has that. It is a bit of a mess, admittedly, but like that, you're missing that element, right? You're missing that piece. And this is actually where, an idea of, patriarchy or patricentrism or something like that, right? Actually, the focus is the father. The father is kind of at the center of all of it. And then everything else is seen in light of that relationship.
Right. Yes. So what I like about this second one a lot more is, again, I don't disagree. Like you should not marry someone who has not thought through how the biblical commands on how the home is supposed to work. Totally true.
Yep. It was also very intellectual, right? It wasn't like, hey, you can live as a woman right now.
This is again, sorry, Reform guys. This is, again, they were all intellectual answers. They were all like,
this way.
Yep. But what I like, in especially the second case of what you're saying, is what actual human life is about is finding your place in the world and living there, right? Like that seems to be what Paul says to do in societies, to try and find what you're supposed to do as a man, woman, child, citizen, father, mother, and live that out quietly to the glory of Christ. Your job is to find your place in it, right? And that can happen. And because this is, again, while of course the fullness of men and women are found most in marriage, because again, it's the gender binary coming together to be one flesh, right? To be the picture of Christ in the church. This is the mystery. However, marriage passes away. There are people who will listen to this who will never be married. May not be, it's obviously not the majority. That's a vast minority of people. But you can truly find your place as a man or as a woman in the world God has made and rules without marriage. And then we all will do so in glory.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so again, I just think that, yes, I want more about finding my place as a father, as a husband, as a citizen, as a church member, than I do about, make sure you're getting, the lines right. Draw the line. Make sure you've drawn the line somewhere. No, make sure you have the right vocation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you should do.
Right. Make sure your vocation aligns with who God has made you to be as a man or a woman.
Right.
And then also, right, it flows out from there, right? How you interact with other men or other women, how you dress, how you carry yourself, the characteristics that you want to be cultivating, the relationships and how you cultivate those relationships. All of these, the scripture speaks to, and nature itself teaches us something about. And it's different for men and women. And like you can do that. Now, admittedly, it's hard in an androgynous society where those distinctions, like there's been an active push to remove those distinctions or to, denigrate certain aspects of those distinctions. It may be difficult, but it is doable. You can do it, and you can live that way right now. Today, you can begin to live more like God has made you to be as either a man or as a woman.
And that, if you aren't married, is what will make you a better spouse than actually having.
Yes.
And obviously guided by the scripture, right? You will be guided by what Paul says men and women are, what they're to do in marriage. But you will be far more, again, this is why knowing the two lines in these verses doesn't make you, I'm going to play, that doesn't make you a more competent husband or wife.
Right.
What does is having molded yourself according to what God has made you to be. So, Pastor Michael, it's a joy for me because we have finally come to a beautiful time, which is Don Carson, before we ever knew we were going to have a podcast, bringing us exegetical hot takes. And by the way, if my children get loud, sometimes when we clean up the house, we do it to this song because there's like 2 lyrics and it's high energy and it's an hour-long loop. But here we go, Pastor Michael. Let's see how this video feels with this great background music.
Each one you could take half an hour to respond to. I want
No, you can't. You have 10 seconds.
12-second responses, that sort of thing. All right.
John Piper has never given a 12-second response to anything, by the way, just so everyone.
I can't hear the pump it up music. You got to crank it up. You got to pump it up, Matt.
Possible, but nevertheless, here we go. What does save through childbearing mean?
Pastor Michael, what does save through childbearing mean? Do you want to give us your hot take?
Boy, my hot take. It relates to the central purpose of women and particularly points to the birth of the Savior. But it does mean more than that. I can't do a hot, quick take on that one, though.
Ooh, maybe.
It's so central to everything. It connects to everything, start to finish. It connects to Genesis. It connects to Revelation. It's so central. And it connects to your life, too. It's not just some esoteric thing. For you, too, it will connect.
Paul
Dude, Kathy Keller was ready.
is going back to Genesis. He talks about women and men's roles. He goes back to Genesis. He thinks about the promise to Eve. You screwed up, but through you, the Savior is going to come and going to save the whole world. I actually checked this with Vern Poythress, the New Testament professor at Westminster Seminary, when I had to teach on this once. He said that is one of the millions of many interpretations of that verse, but it's an acceptable one, and that's the one that I have gone with. That Paul is just thinking back to Genesis, okay? A woman, not that you're saved through having children, but that Eve, by having a child, who had a child who was eventually going to be the Messiah.
You're over 12 seconds.
I actually like that interpretation, but I also like the interpretation that takes the childbearing as a kind of representation of what is distinctly female, what is distinct about a woman.
You're good.
And saying that womanness, if you embrace that, that's part of your living out your faith and your salvation.
That's the matrix in which you're saved. Mm-hmm. Well, that's two interpretations.
All right, Pastor Michael, what did you think of the two
Pretty
answers?
good, actually. I was impressed, actually. I was impressed with the answer.
Yeah, again, for whatever reason, more willing to fire off like very direct answers to one of the more difficult things. If people want us to walk through the various interpretive options for that verse, perhaps we will sometime. Certainly, that sounds like a good purely Presbyterian program, at least. All right, let's get the next one, and we will get Pastor Michael's hot take on it.
Interpretations then. All right, what does submit to one another? Why is or is that not perfectly reciprocal?
Oh, Pastor Michael.
We did this. Go back to our Andy
this.
Stanley video.
Yeah, but give us your 10-second summary of that Andy Stanley video.
So you are to submit to one another out of the Lord. And what that looks like is obeying God in the way that he calls you to obey as a man or a woman. In marriage, that's going to look like wives submitting to your husbands in everything as to the Lord. Husbands loving your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, washing her in the word, and so on and so forth.
Has anybody ever heard of a heading over a topic that then has many subtopics?
Based, Kathy Keller. That is the way to answer that question.
Hashtag based Kathy Keller.
That was the main comeback when you turn to Ephesians 5. It begins, be subject to one another. And they said, so there you are. That's not complementarianism. That's total mutuality. And my answer was, just read the next verse. Head and submission. So my way of handling it, and there's another way, Wayne and Grudem and I don't go the same direction on this, is to say, there is a way that a husband submits to a wife. Namely, he dies for her, but he's doing it in leadership. So I remember the Michelson.
Boo. Should have
That's
just like
that's
that.
not the right way.
I don't know what No Way Wayne's way of handling that question is, but I am certain it's superior to what that was just said. That was why, Pastor John? I don't know why. I don't know why you fight against this idea that it's mutual submission and then say, but there is definitely a way they're going to submit. No, because guess what? I'm sorry, John Piper, you're about to fall to the same problem Andy Stanley did. When Jesus Christ died for the church, he's not submitting to the church.
Yep.
I don't get it. I don't know why. I don't know why Paul's direct answer doesn't guide us here.
Just throw Luke 22 in my face. Like, there he is on the floor washing the disciples' feet. That's submission. I say, right. And nobody in that room doubted who the leader was at that moment.
Wrong. It's not submission. It's service.
Yes, that is different.
I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know why. I don't know. I'm not smart. I'm not smarter than John Piper. I didn't study in Germany, right? I didn't go to, I didn't start the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. I don't know why these things are not apparent. I don't know why. Because he's right. That is service. Jesus, if someone says, well, look at Jesus on his knees, is this what you're talking about? And I'd say, yes, because as John Piper said, no one in the room wondered who was in charge. Can you imagine how humbling it would be to have the person you know as the Messiah and you probably now understand is the Son of God say, I'm going to wash your feet?
Yeah.
Can you, like, that just, you understand how lowering, if he's doing this, where that sends me, right, the depths to which that lowers me is completely different. So
yeah.
That is servant submission. So there is a mutuality. I mean, for you to take that responsibility against your nature, and it's against every man's nature to say he's sorry first. Every man's nature to go ahead.
This was his 12-second answer to something Kathy Keller answered in 5 seconds, by the way. This is
ahead. And because he knows it's her fault.
On that cheerful note, we'll press on to the last one.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Like, it was time to move. Pastor Don was getting lost in how he was answering this question. I don't know where he was going.
John Piper has no regrets.
John Piper has no regrets and had no idea how to answer that question in 12 seconds. Because, again, it's not his personality, right? He's like, I'm going to preach 10 sermons on these 3 verses, right? I'm going to take 10 hours. So, anyways, here we go. Last question.
Whether it is or not, his responsibility is to do the absolutely counter human nature thing and initiate reconciliation in this hard.
John Piper will not be stifled by Don Carson.
He won't stop. Everyone's like, please get this guy to stop.
I know. Everyone's like, Tim Keller's like, well, I didn't give the least clear answer on the panel now. That's been topped.
You must do it over and over.
What does it mean to keep silent in the church?
Here we go. All right, Pastor Michael, what does it mean to keep silent in the church? This is another passage. We've jumped to 1 Corinthians now.
Are we jumping there? I mean, so is that,
Oh,
or is it just where she is to remain quiet? in
yeah.
1
Sorry.
Timothy
Yeah.
2? It could be. I mean, it could be
You're right.
either.
I think it's
'Cause-
the second. 1 Timothy 2. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority. She must remain silent in the church.
Yep, she must remain quiet or silent. It could be. I mean, it could be in 1 Corinthians as well. But in either way, you have certain aspects of the gathered church that are set aside, or certain roles of authority amongst the gathered church that are set aside clearly for men. And so when it says, "I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man," clearly he's talking about teaching in this gathered setting, and she is to remain quiet, right? So in other words, she is not to teach; she is supposed to receive that.
Right. Yeah. So the verse that I thought it meant in 1 Corinthians, I'm just going to read it, is 1 Corinthians 14:34. As in all the churches of the saints, women should keep silent or quiet in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law says. If they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is improper for a woman to speak in the church. By the way, we will be interested to how they handle this. But man, so much of the egalitarian defenses fall apart here. One, Paul says this is what is done in all the churches.
All the churches.
This isn't what they need in Ephesus because of the cult of Artemis or whatever.
Yep.
And then he says, why should they do this? Because that's what the law says, as is written in the law. Fascinating. So here we go. And obviously he is grounding it in the women in the church are not supposed to do something the husbands of their husbands would be allowed to do.
Well, it doesn't mean that she can't pray with her head covered. It doesn't mean she can't prophesy with her head covered. Right. So that's chapter 11. You quoted chapter 14. So that's where contextual exegesis matters. You get to chapter 14, let her ask her husband what's going on there. And your interpretation, I like, is that that's probably referring something to the authoritative discussion of the prophetic meanings that have just emerged at that moment. At that moment, it's more fitting that the men tackle this issue than the women, because she's back in chapter 11, supposed to have some symbol of authority, some culturally appropriate evidence of her submission when she opens her mouth and prays or prophesies in the church. So it can't mean she can't pray and she can't prophesy.
In other words, this discussion cannot go on a mere proof texting basis. My father used to teach me when I was a boy, a text without a context becomes a pretext for a proof text.
But what did your mom say, Don Carson?
That's what we really need to know, because she was smarter, evidently.
She probably had an even better line.
Last word.
No, I was just going to say, we're following James Hurley there, by the way.
Yes.
And he originally wrote that up
Last word, Tim Keller. No. That's great.
in a Westminster Theological Journal article before everything else back in the late 70s.
Right.
Very, very helpful. Basically, women should keep silent when the prophets are being judged, because that's what,
the elders.
that's when we're just essentially we're doing what ordained people do, which is determining the doctrine of the church. And therefore, it's not saying that every single time there's a gathering, they can't pray, they can't say anything.
All right, we're 2 or 3 minutes over. I'm going to close in prayer. Then we have a 15-minute break, and we'll start with a second panel.
So, Pastor Michael, there you go. There are the 3 hot takes. Interesting. I do think I am pretty persuaded of basically the view that they laid out there, that this refers to primarily that this is when, in reference to the decisions regarding, which would be doctrinal matters. And so I am pretty much persuaded of that. Obviously, John Piper is right. It is not a complete silence, and that is because obviously there have been other cases in 1 Corinthians where women have been directly said to say this or do this, in ways that would have them have a voice in church. So, Pastor Michael, we did it. We did it. Celebrated our.
I want you to play our message from Mark Driscoll again. I don't know that everybody heard it when you first did it.
I will.
Because people joined as we went. But I just want that. I want it again before we're done.
It's too good. We will do it again. Pastor Michael, this has been a pleasure as is normal. We hope everyone who watched live, everyone who listened to this podcast, we hope it was enjoyable. We hope maybe you listened to this while you were getting ready for your date tonight, your big complementarian Valentine's Day date. We hope it was helpful and a blessing to you. It was enjoyable for us. Pastor Michael, I think I've been really thinking about this. The Gospel Coalition is launching season 2 of Good Faith Debates. Even more good faith.
And we still haven't watched the original ones. And I've not seen any of them.
I haven't watched a single second. We've waited it all forever.
We need to do it. We need to get in there.
And I think we need to do it as a watch party. I think
that'd be fun.
I think that would be maybe the most enjoyable way to do it. And so, my friends, Pastor Michael and I will do our first Good Faith Debate when this YouTube channel has 200 subscribers. We have over 100, so we still do need some growth. We have plenty of shows planned without the Good Faith Debates, but we know you want them. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, you're one of the hundreds of people there, follow the link to the YouTube channel and subscribe to this channel, because that means very soon we will do our first Good Faith Debate. And Michael, maybe we shouldn't promise this because they could all do this tomorrow, and we're not going to record this tomorrow. Should we say we will attempt to do this in an evening time when we?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should try to do it at a time that everybody else could watch with us. Try to do it on an evening. We can enjoy it a little bit more. I think we can make that happen.
Great. So we will do the first Good Faith Debate, and perhaps right before when we hit 200 subscribers, we will do a poll of which one we should start with, because given there are so many and it may take us a while, I don't know how long these are, but given that, we should let people decide which one they want us to watch first. So happy Valentine's Day, everybody. I hope Valentine's Day means something to you. That's what I hope for.
We love you all.
That's right. So we will let Pastor Mark, deepfake Pastor Mark, just to be clear, for anyone at Real Faith who may stumble across this, I am not defaming, misrepresenting this as the actual Mark Driscoll.
This is a character of our making at Restless and is not liable to lawsuit because we're not stealing anything. This is fair use. I think it's fair use.
We're certain it's fair use. It has to be, or we're going to have to pull this down.
Deepfake Pastor Mark here. I will turn the show over to Restless in just a second, but I wanted to take a moment and wish all of their listeners a happy Valentine's Day. If you're watching this video, would you click the like button, or if you're listening on the podcast, written review it for them? They would really appreciate it. And anyways, just to be clear, Charlie Self is a real person, and this is not the human Mark Driscoll who lives in Arizona. This is the deepfake pastor Mark who lives on the Restless podcast.
Rate and review this show, subscribe everywhere, contact us on social media.